Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Inside Job. Okay, so I should clarify right out of the gate. I've already watched Inside Job before, but I thought I would do a review series on it because A, I'm currently waiting for the Cuphead show to relaunch, and B, I just kind of like the idea of Inside Job since it is very much it's basically the story behind Inside Job is that most government conspiracies are true. That's essentially the premise. But yeah, it's essentially an office workplace comedy, but the office workplace that the comedy is set in is set around the idea is set in this large government cover-up company run by a shadow organization. So yeah, essentially every government conspiracy you know is true. But in any case, the episode opens up with a man who we don't get to see clearly. I'm standing outside the White House, and it's at this point where a tour group comes along and declares things about the White House, about how also called the People's House. At which point the man whose name is Rand Ridley, Rand then proceeds to debunk everything that there is to know about the government, and that everything in the free world is a lie. And then proceeds to decide to tell everybody that the president is a robot, that there are shape-shifting lizard men, and that essentially the entire world is run by a giant shadow government that the true idea of democracy doesn't really exist, and also declares that because of that, he also points out that said shadow government has trained snipers on him because they don't want him to tell anybody about what's going on, and sure enough, right on cue, several sniper dots appear on his head, and he just remarks that he likes the fact that he likes it when he's right. At which point his daughter Reagan shows up and not only calls up the snipers, but tells him to get in the car, and then proceeds to drive off, but not before Reagan pulls out several pins of for free several free American keychains, throws them into the crowd, which winds up hitting a guy by accident, and tells everybody democracy is real. At which point Rand points out that he's just happy that his daughter came by, and points out that now she's made such a great time that they can actually go and get a pretzel at Wetzel's Pretzels. But then Reagan tells him that he can't keep doing stuff like this, and then proceeds to reveal that he is in fact completely 100% right, and that he almost exposed the deep state, and yeah, just kind of confirms that the deep that she's actually annoyed with him for trying to expose the deep state, because obviously you're not supposed to tell anybody that every government conspiracy is real. You're not supposed to tell anybody any of that, otherwise they may have a bit of a nervous breakdown. And of course, Reagan then proceeds to confirm that. Then proceeds to tell him that she doesn't want him to exposing any more of the government's secrets, especially since she's already working on a big project and also is apparently going to be getting a promotion at the company where she works. So she points out that she's very happy that she just wants Rand to behave until everything squares away, and does point out that she can't wait to get her promotion, pointing out that she can't wait to rule the world with an iron fist, and then also emphasizes the point by revealing that she actually did in fact invent an actual iron fist, and when Rand points out that he's seen better, she merely pushes a button, which then proceeds to flip him off 3 times, and also make a whole bunch of large signs and flashing lights and a whole bunch of other things. And Rand concludes that it is in fact very cool regardless. At which point they actually arrive at Reagan's company, as we find out, is actually called Cognito Inc., which is a play on words. And their main tagline for how they operate their business is "We are a company." And essentially they walk in. It's revealed that the person running the front desk is in fact a hologram. She's not actually real. And they proceed, and of course Ren demonstrates this by throwing something at her in frustration when she greets the two of them. At which point they get into an elevator and then proceed to go into the actual building, which is essentially just has massive conspiracy things everywhere. There's a Mayan calendar in the main lobby. Their Bigfoot is currently locked in a storage tank. You've got a senator who walks by and is revealed to actually be a lizard person, and essentially you just got a whole bunch of other things about how the government is just about how all of the government conspiracies. That's essentially what the series is. It just establishes all the government conspiracies are real, and and as they're going through Reagan, conveniently they all come up as Reagan is talking about them. But Reagan points out that while her dad is living with her, he can't do anything to expose the deep state, which means no telling everybody about lizard people, about how the world is run by a secret shadow government, and more importantly that they can't tell anybody that they're going to replace the robot with the president with a robot, because as it turns out Reagan is doing exactly that. She's inventing a robot that is actually dubbed Project Robotus, and which is a pun on robot and POTUS, which is just President of the United States shortened. But yeah, and also I should mention the Robotus project isn't really the president. As we find out, the president isn't meant to look like any such president that we've seen before. Literally, he's just those generic presidents that people put in cartoons to keep them from dating poorly, and something that Animaniacs has actually called out in one of their TV shows, or rather, a couple of shows have done that. They've called it out, and and obviously this has happened a lot. I've reviewed a couple of shows like this, Sonic X, Animaniacs. I've reviewed or seen a couple of shows that do exactly this to keep their show from dating poorly, and it does work, but of course it is at this point where Reagan calls in the guy to actually escort her dad home and gives him a taser and tells him to lightly tase her dad if he gives them any trouble. But it's at this point where Rand then proceeds to go on a rant and reveal that actually he started the company, and that he was forcibly retired and removed from the company, and that he's not exactly happy about any of that, and then he's disappointed that Cognito Inc. has just become such a rough and difficult place to work. And he's not happy about the way the company is currently being run, and of course it's at this point where he's actually escorted out, and Reagan then proceeds to prepare to get ready to go to work, pointing because she's late. And then she walks into the main office, into the main meeting room, which is the main setting of the entire series. But she walks into the office room, and we actually meet all of the department heads. We meet Glenn, who is actually revealed to be half dolphin, and he goes on to explain why in a couple of literally a couple of scenes later. And we also meet Gigi, who is in charge of social media and news coverage. She's designed to be used news coverage and a couple of other things. You got Andre, who is in charge of biochems, and then Magic Mike is actually in charge of I still don't know, secrets. I forget specifically what he's in charge of. I think it's revealed in a later episode, but I forget specifically what he's in charge of. But I honestly forget. I know he's in charge of like psychedelics and like using memory erasure and stuff like that, because we do eventually find out what kind of character he is. But yeah, she walks in and then proceeds to brief the rest of the department, and also when she walks in, it's established that everybody that Andre is high. That's an established part of his character, but Andre is high literally all the time because he's head of biochems and can get all the exotic drugs that other people wouldn't normally have access to. So he's just high all the time, and that's a main part of his character. And also, and this is slight spoiler for later in the season, but eventually, but there is a point where he is in fact sober, and it's a living nightmare for him. He cannot function sober at all. But in case she walks in and then proceeds to give a brief reveal about what exactly it is that's going on. As it turns out, the reason they're replacing the president with a robot is because the current president, who Robotus is based on, or rather the real fictional president, he's dumb. He's an idiot. I openly meant that. He is notably, according to Reagan, they're building robotics, which she admits is her life's work, because because honestly the president was just too dumb to manipulate, and it proved that building a robot was literally the only way they were ever going to be able to just take over the world and keep him under their thumb. And it also points out that because this is such a big deal and because she's been working very hard on this, she points out that all of the department heads need to be on their best behavior, which for Andre means no huffing biochems. For Glenn, it means not using all of his military technology to spy on his wife. And for Mike and Gigi, it means not taking a selfie on the moon landing site, which, yeah, that does wind up being relevant later. I will openly admit that. That's foreshadowing. But, yeah, in any case, she then points. In any case, everybody is annoyed, especially since they point out that she requires more clearance than she currently has, and that she's not the boss of them. But then Reagan points out that she is in fact going to be getting a promotion very soon, and does declare that after that she's going to be quite literally the boss of them, and also tells them to get all their groaning out, and because she's going to ban that immediately. At which point, her boss, JR, he calls her on a video call from the main office, and tells her to come down to the office, which she does. She immediately goes on to go to his office, and actually goes on to goes to meet with JR, who, as it turns out, is on a call with Oprah. And that does in fact become a recurring bit throughout the season. It will become important, but it does actually wind up playing a larger narrative purpose later. I will explain that. But yeah, just Oprah, just casually on a call with a guy who's currently helping run the free world, essentially. But yeah, it's just, there's a lot of things to unpack with this series, and it's just really great. But in any case, she goes in to actually go in JR, who eventually hangs up, and also makes jokes with Oprah over the phone about how he could quite literally have her assassinated. And even though he has no plans of actually doing it, and that's just the way they are. They just joke. But in any case, he eventually hangs up, and does turn to Reagan, and does point out that she does have quite the resume to her, pointing out that she graduated from MIT at 13. She's very accomplished. She's a hard worker, and also points out that productivity has gone up a lot, has skyrocketed, which of course she thinks is a compliment until he remarks that it's actually gone into the toilet, and reveals that he actually has a full list of complaints from other people about how she's just apparently just very difficult to work with. She's not very good at making contacts, and she's just very bad at people skills. And of course, to actually prove that she actually is good with eye contact, she then proceeds to make very intense eye contact with JR, which he probably tells her to never do again because it scares the shit out of him. But of course then proceeds to point out that obviously he's just worried that she's not going to be able to have what it takes to run the company because she has no people skills. So he points out that at the time, for the time being, he's actually going to be hiring somebody else to actually help fill in for the fact that she has no people skills, which of course causes her to become very concerned. And it turns out she's right, because we then eventually meet a guy named Brett, who as they find out, they had microchipped and actually had his head covered with a bag so that he couldn't see around. And of course, it's at this point where they reveal that that Brett is actually going to be working alongside Reagan as head of each of the departments, and that he is actually going to be working with her from now on. And this, of course, causes Reagan to become very upset with JR, who merely points out that she's still getting her promotion, but also so is Brett, and then proceeds to leave. Which of course causes her to become very, very upset. But she ultimately is forced to actually go on and give Brett a tour of the facility, and then proceeds to reveal what exactly it is that they do. And then proceed to actually see a promo bumper for Cognito Inc. that they show new hirees. And what we find out is that Cognito Inc., that since for a very long time, the Shadow Government, who we do meet in this episode, but are actually seen briefly in this opening thing. The Shadow Government are actually a group of a council of disguised people who, since the dawn of time, have actually been running everything from behind the scenes. But they eventually decide to found Cognito Inc. because, as it turns out, running the free world is hard. And they openly admit that running the free world is difficult, and so they've made Cognito Inc. to help them run it in their place. So, and for those reasons, they just kind of run Cognito Inc. Both as an evil shadow, as a secret shadow government that is designed to just kind of run the world, but also just as their main primary stockholders. They just own the company. And request things from the company to run the free world. That's essentially what they do. But in any case, they do decide to actually. Reagan then proceeds to show Brett around, revealing what exactly it is that they do, and that's and then in addition to a couple other things, they predict the stock market through blood sacrifices. And a couple of other things. She just shows them around, and eventually takes them and briefs them on Robotus, which she remarks is her life's work, and that's eventually, and also points out that her lab is probably the place she feels the most most herself, because she points out that the company is actually that she runs that is very efficient and maintained by her, and points out that she would hope to make the entire world that way, but also realizes that actually came out wrong, and that it could. And that she only meant that she wanted it to be efficient, not necessarily controlled by her. But even though she implies that she wouldn't turn down the opportunity. At which point Brett actually sees Robotus and tries to shake hands with it, thinking it's the real president. But what we find out is that the Robotus actually isn't able to actually identify who Brett is. And of course, Reagan merely explains that he's not really the president, that they're still working out the kinks with him, and that eventually he will in fact become the real, and he will be as indistinguishable from the real thing as possible. But also then proceeds to use a machine to actually change her clothes and go through her morning routine, and then asks Brett how he actually came to be hired. And what we find out is that he's not qualified to run the company at all. As we quickly find out, and as Brett explains, he actually graduated from Yale at the top of his fraternity, and the only reason he was hired is because JR liked his handshake, and that which when he was microchipped and brought into the company as Reagan's social interactions expert, and Reagan quickly becomes a little upset when she finds all of this out, pointing out that she feels like Brett has no real experience to run a company at all, and that he's not really organized enough to actually run a company. She realizes that he has literally no experience whatsoever. But of course, Brett points out that he actually has tons of experience, and that he's more or less. But Reagan quickly deduces that he's more or less there to just be a yes man, which of course causes her to become very upset. And later that day, after the workday is over, But in case later that day, they're actually all eating lunch, and Brett quickly hits it off with all the department heads. And this is where we mostly find out what they do. And what we find out is, first and foremost, is that Mike is actually a mushroom from Hollow Earth, and that it's actually this world that they've created is actually adheres to the Hollow Earth theory rather than the flat Earth theory that people have been that think is real, which it isn't. Obviously, the world is not flat; it is round. But also what we find out is that Glenn is actually head of military research, and that he apparently gave his DNA for his country, and that is why he's a dolphin. He became the world's first dolphin super soldier, and he is proud of it. And also claims that he now has the strength and intelligence of a Dalton, which he then proceeds to completely undermine by trying to open a bag of chips and can't. So, and of course we also find out in the scene that Mike can read minds, and that's and also we find out that Brett has memorized a lot of comedy bits. And overall, this scene is just to establish that Brett has actually hit it off with all the department heads, while Reagan just looks on in disgust, essentially. She doesn't know how to actually handle him, but she does point out that of course she doesn't fully understand what's going on. She doesn't fully understand how to actually look at how to actually figure out what to do with Brett. And this is this point where Mike points out that he can sense her thoughts and sense that she's in anguish. And Reagan tries to tell him to eat shit, but also points out that because he's a mushroom from Hollow Earth, he may very well like the taste of eating shit. So she points out that she's going to rescind that fact. But in any case, Mike then tells Reagan that he knows they have a will they won't they thing going on, which Reagan denies ever was ever a thing, and it's clear that Mike is just talking out of his ass. But in any case, it's at this point where as we find out, Mike actually has a solution to the Brett problem, which is to slip some poison into his coffee and make it look like an accident, which Reagan does cheer up at, but then Mike reveals that he was kidding, and also makes fun of the fact that Reagan thought he was serious, which Reagan becomes personally insulted by. But in any case, she then goes home and is very much confused as to what to actually do with the whole Brett situation, and what we find out is that she actually has been raised at the top of her class. She is in fact MIT material. We see a whole bunch of other things with her dad and a whole bunch of other things, and also all of her various projects that she's worked on. But in any case, she then proceeds to sit down. She then proceeds to kind of sit down and work on her code for Robotus, and then proceeds to talk to Rand, who is currently sitting on her couch, and asks her if she brought home snacks. But she merely decides to ask her dad a very personal question about what would happen about if she's likable and has good social skills. And Reagan points out that those are and Rand actually tells Reagan that those are overrated anyway, and asks her what this is about. And she then proceeds to explain the entire Brett situation to him. And he stands up immediately and gets offended on her behalf, because apparently that's the same exact thing that happened to him. He believed that he was coming into a partnership, and then he was pushed out of the company. And what we find out is that he actually tried to blow up the sun to secure skin cancer, as he puts it. But he also points out that he does in fact have a point, and that's obviously Cognito Inc. would know a good idea if they hit them, and also wonders how her Robotus project is coming around, and decides to check her code. But which he then dissuades her to go away, and then leaves her laptop for several seconds unattended to point out that her beliefs about how she points out that even though Brett has come onto the team, she's not going to let the fact that he's there undermine all of her hard work, and that she is going to ultimately buckle down, do her best on the Robotus project, and ultimately prevail. And it's at this point where she scoops up her laptop, which Rand was standing by for several seconds. I will get into that, because it is implied that he does something in this scene, but we don't find out what until later. And of course, it is at this point where she actually takes the Robotus project back to work with her, and under hours, and decides to actually go back and dedicate her entire free time to actually finishing the Robotus project and making JR and the rest of the company proud of her, despite Brett. Even though, as we find out, the Robotus actually does in fact quite like Brett, and does comment at it from Reagan's duffel bag, because she just brings the head home with her. But in any case, she goes on to just spend the entire night working on it, and by the next morning, Robotus is fully functional and able to be presented to JR and the rest of the development department heads. And JR is actually very impressed by the whole project, and points out that he's actually very impressed. And Reagan also demonstrates that he can actually be shut off with a push of a button and turn him into a suitcase, which everybody points out is very impressive. And of course, JR remarks that the Shadow Government that the Shadow Organization would actually be very proud. And sure enough, it's at this point with the Shadow Council, and we finally do meet them. But the Shadow Council reveal themselves via a hologram message, and point out that they are in fact very proud of Reagan, but also have a couple of concerns about the Robotus potentially revolting on them. And what we find out is that the Robotus is actually just a slurry of a bunch of different Super Bowl commercials and old speeches, which makes him too patriotic to actually revolt on his own. So, and which does indeed please the shadow government, and they tell JR that he may very well have a robe and creepily disguised voice in his future, and and of course JR is very flattered by their honesty, but also points out that the honor doesn't really go to him. But before he can finish his sentence, Brett comes in with bagels and undermines all of Reagan's hard work. Essentially, Reagan and Reagan, of course, is not particularly happy with that, and of course they decide to actually get to, but of course JR praises Brett for going above and beyond, even though Reagan literally points out that she assaults all of artificial intelligence in the middle of the night, and their productivity is all up because of her. All things that are attributed to Brett because he brought in bagels, which of course she becomes annoyed by, and of course everybody decides to celebrate Brett's achievement instead, and this causes Reagan to become very upset and very stressed. So she then proceeds to go to Brett's office and decides to ask him about it. And he's currently humming to himself while trying to fix a pool table. And she wonders what and she asks, and she points out that obviously that was actually that it was cool of him to actually bring in bagels, even though she points out that was obviously not something she's particularly proud of or happy with. And he actually thanks Reagan, pointing out that was actually something he was nervous about, and does point out that he actually does have a lot of nervous energy, because obviously this is his first time on the first week on the job, and he's not entirely sure if he's doing it right. And also to kind of get out some of his nervous energy, starts doing push-ups. And Reagan points out that working at Cognito Inc. is not a good idea for your own mental well-being. And that's if you're actually a nervous kind of person, you will cause problems. And that is established very quickly by a certain by somebody in the main foyer of the place. Decided to shoot up the office because he points out they're undermining democracy in the free world, and he just kind of snaps and goes on a rampage, and of course Reagan points out that this would be a perfect opportunity for Brett to get himself out, pointing out that he should obviously get himself out while he still can, because this is going to only get worse. But Brett merely cites that positive energy, citing Pitbull as an inspiration for himself, and that you need to be able to take a positive with a negative, because a positive plus a negative is better than nothing. Even though Reagan points out that it is quite literally nothing. She points out that it is in fact nothing, zero, not zilch. But of course. Brett merely points out that he's just more than happy to be able to continue to work there, and decides to leave. At which point, Reagan realizes Brett is really just playing up the whole gullible idiot type thing a little bit too well, and decides to determine who Brett is actually secretly working for. And sure enough, she then proceeds to spend the entire night researching Brett's Facebook feed, researching all of the things he's done, and just a whole bunch of other things. And she spends the entire night going through all of that. And sure enough, Brett is currently in the middle of giving everybody nicknames on the board when Reagan suddenly barges in, late obviously. She barges in having spent the entire night researching Brett and all of his background, and she barges in. And of course JR does comment on the fact that she's late, and Brett tries to make a comment about how she's late and tries to call her late Reagan, which she points out anybody who calls her that will be sent to Guantanamo, and then proceeds to find everything that she's found about Brett, about how he played both, how he seemingly plays both sides, because how he was both a jock and a goth in high school, having played football and was also a jock in high school, but also that he pledged to every fraternity, and also that he filled in all of the bubbles on his SAT test, and they literally have no idea what exactly is going on with him, and that they need to constantly keep him under surveillance. And it's at this point where JR kind of gets annoyed with Reagan, because obviously he thinks that she's going to have a breakdown just like your dad did, and then proceeds to tell her that she's off the Robotus projects, which of course she becomes upset with, because that was her entire thing that she's been working on. But he merely tells her that she just needs to take however much time off she needs to clear her head and get it out of her system. And she leaves dejectedly while Brett is, much to his chagrin, moved to the head of the robotics project. And of course tells them that they need to get him on, that they need to get the robotics up and running and on Air Force One by the end of the day. And of course Brett does in fact do it because it's his job, but it's also made abundantly clear that Brett has literally no idea what he's doing. It's made abundantly clear that he just has no idea what he's supposed to do. But in case Reagan goes home dejected while they actually finish up abducting the real president, replacing it with Robotus, and escorting him in. And of course, at this point where the department heads then prepare to actually send Robotus out and see if he can perform a field test, and sure enough, he was able to actually greet the Sultan of Brunei with little to no hassle. He's able to actually successfully converse with the Sultan of Brunei, and also reveals that there's a joke in there about how the president literally gave him a wife and kids, which is hilarious and a little bit dark. But of course the department heads are very happy about the fact that he's successful, and but Brett also leaves to go calm his nerves and goes to the bathroom and to actually calm himself. But that only makes it worse because he's trying to picture his mental health, but doesn't really know what a mental health looks like. But he's trying to, but of course, the department heads then proceed to cheer about the fact that Robotus has actually succeeded in his mission. But then Robotus winds up going haywire. As we quickly find out, Robotus winds up getting his picture taken with the Sultan of Brunei, and then starts becoming a little bit off. And also starts to note that he seems to know what he is and that he's real. And of course, Robotus then proceeds to point out that if anybody's ever woken up and just felt like they were asleep in a dream, and then proceeds to develop an openly jingoistic attitude, and proceeds to declare that he is in fact that America should come first. And then, as we find out via a emergency press conference, which is how Reagan finds out about the whole situation, because she's currently sitting at home with her dad watching the news, and because she's fired and she has nothing else to do. But eventually she finds out that Robotus has in fact gone rogue, and he is currently trying to build a large cube to kind of secede America from the rest of the world, And of course she points out that anybody who tries to get close will be declared an enemy, which of course causes Reagan to panic a little bit, to kind of panic a little bit and point out and wonder what exactly is going on. And sure enough, what we find out is that it's actually Rand's doing. He then proceeds to gloat that how it's actually going to blow up in JR's face, and then proceeds to reveal that, and I mentioned this earlier, but he then proceeds to reveal that he actually tampered with Reagan's code, so that on the off chance she was ever removed, it would cause Robotus to actually go rogue and try to take over the free world. And of course, Reagan is actually very annoyed about it, but also points out that once she's figured out the problem, she will actually be able to buy him all the pretzels he wants. And this, of course, causes Reagan to finally realize that her dad wasn't doing it to help her, but rather to just engineer a situation where he would hang out with her, which of course causes her to become angry, and she immediately goes to go and disarm the Robotus, and then also proceeds to call Brett, and goes to Cognito Inc. while calling Brett. And what we find out is that Cognito Inc. is not taking it well. They're actually, all of the employees are just panicking and not really sure what to do. And the department heads, realizing they're probably going to be fired anyway, have started slacking off and decide to just live it up until the day everything ends. And of course, it's at this point which they do call Brett, and Brett points out that she did in fact have him down pat, and that the only reason he was hired is because his face is too generic to be tracked by satellites. But she does point out, and he does point out that obviously he knows he's not cut out to be material anymore. But she points out that she's more than happy to come and help him out, and that she's more than willing to meet up with him, and and tells him to just grab any supplies that he thinks will be useful, and that she'll be right there to actually sort the whole situation out. And sure enough, she arrives at Cognito Inc. and Brett now has a duffel bag full of stuff. And while JR points out that he actually calls the Shadow Council after seeing all of this blow up. And the Shadow Council calls him, obviously, because they're annoyed, but he tells them that he has their best man on it. And sure enough, Brett and Reagan are currently looking into it, but what we find out is that Reagan actually had her fingerprint scanner privileges revoked because she was fired. And when she asked Brett for his, he accidentally burns them off with a fingerprint eraser that is heavily implied to be inspired by Men in Black. But of course, realizing that they're not going to be able to take the train directly to New York, they then proceed to actually go out to actually get into a cab and go that way, and arrive at the hotel where they then proceed to actually try and work out what exactly the game plan is, and it's at this point where Reagan actually goes through all the supplies about what exactly it is that Brett brought, and does note that a lot of it is seemingly useless. There's a can of fire spray, and among other things, but does note that all of it is seemingly useless and that Brett can't really be trusted. But and of course points out that Brett can't be trusted to do anything. But then they arrive at the hotel, and obviously there is a lot of Secret Service there. But fortunately, Brett has an idea, and sure enough, he then proceeds to use the fact that he was in fact in a fraternity to sweet talk his way past several of the to pass the Secret Service by pretending to be a guard, and also convincing him that they were actually once pledged to the same fraternity, and that because of that, the Secret Service guy actually does trust Brett to take over his position and leaves. And of course, Reagan isn't entirely sure how that worked, but Brett merely points out that because he pledged to every single fraternity, he knows all the handshakes, so he was able to just easily schmooze his way past the Secret Service. And it's at this point where they arrive in Barbados' hotel room, where he's currently watching all of the free world being transformed into his ideal America comes first society. At which point Reagan barges in and tries to get him to shut down by putting in the shutdown authorization code. But what we quickly find out is that Robotus has in fact reached true artificial intelligence and erased that part of his code. And also because of course Reagan does briefly celebrate by gloating about the fact that she's better than Boston Dynamics, which Boston Dynamics are kind of known for their cutting edge robotics, so I can understand that. But in any case, she then proceeds to gloat. But then asks Robotus to continue when she realizes she was interrupting, and what we find out is that it was because of that Robotus actually developed his jingoistic attitude. He realized after achieving true artificial intelligence that America is just better than everybody else, or at least that's what he thinks, and that he has no real problem with actually running the free world that way. He openly admits that by putting America first, he will actually be able to cut off any foreign influences and create a perfect society. But of course, she points out that obviously that's not how that works, and that you can't just that hiding out from the rest of the world isn't just how the world works, and and also points out that even if it was right, that even if hiding off from the rest of the world was how it worked, he points out that obviously the America has problems as well. And then to prove her point, proceeds to connect him to the internet, where he then realizes that America in general just has problems as well. Specifically, Florida they bring up because if you don't watch or read the news, Florida is just in there a lot. Florida is just a massive problem. Florida just regularly has a lot of crime problems, and they just make a lot of decisions that aren't helpful to the rest of the country. So Yeah, Florida. So yeah, the Robotus, after realizing Reagan is right, realizes that he can now no longer cut off the rest of the world, America from the rest of the world, and decides that the best way to deal with the problem is to just destroy humanity outright. Which Reagan realizes that the exact problem, or the exact opposite of what the problem she was trying to create, and of course they too try to fight with Robotus, who is currently in the process of arming the nukes and awaiting the orders. Tells the Pentagon to actually arm the nukes and prepare their orders, but at which point Reagan and the president tries to fight back against the president alongside Brett, but the Robotus merely bats them aside, but in the process Reagan has actually used a can of fire spray to expose his face, his real face, his robotic face, and they do go out the window, but wind up surviving. And meanwhile, the Secret Service run in and have no real idea of what exactly it is they need to be able to do. But and of course, when they see the robot, that the president is actually a robot, they actually panic. And Robotus merely points out that obviously finding out the president was a robot wasn't really on their list of priorities today, and decides to kill them so that they don't have to, so that they both feel nothing. Which of course is just very dark. But he then proceeds to run up the stairs while Reagan quickly figures out that they need to actually take care of the president, and makes a ray gun out of one of the dropped Secret Service guns, and points out that they need to take down the president because obviously she created the singularity, and she quickly realizes that that's going to be a problem. So she does point out that they need to go after him, and of course start running up the stairs up the rest of the hotel, but. What we quickly find out is that Reagan is just not up to the task of running upstairs because she runs a desk job. So Brett winds up giving her a piggyback and walking her up the stairs that way. And of course she points out, and of course it's at this point where they run up the stairs, and they do wind up running up the stairs to get there, and of course Reagan decides to call up the team to get back up. But what we quickly find is that all of the department heads are just high because they just completely tuned out, and it's at this point where Brett points out that it's this point where she's having trouble getting through to them. So Brett winds up volunteering to take over, and does in fact convince them to actually learn how to actually back down and accept the fact, and just kind of learn that they shouldn't be panicking, because he points out that he was a panicking mess earlier, and now he's currently trying to save the free world with an 140-pound woman on his back. And does point out that even though it seems bleak, they can turn it around. And it's at this point, and this enables the rest of the department heads to realize that Brett is right, and that they shouldn't be panicking and trying to solve the problem rather than making it worse. So they decide to actually listen to Brett's orders, who then defers them to Reagan, who immediately tells them to just do all of their respective jobs to keep the entire situation with the president under wraps. Which of course everybody leaves to immediately go do, and of course it's at this point where they confront the president at the top of the hotel. But he then proceeds to hijack a helicopter which has a married couple inside of it, who are currently getting ready to actually go on a romantic flight, and of course Reagan and Brett wind up getting inside, and Brett tries to deal battle with the Robotus, but since the Robotus is directly connected to the chopper and also controlling with his mind, while Brett points out is trying to fight him, they can't actually fight him because he's currently in control of it. And Brett's just impressed about the fact that he's currently both A, getting the shit beaten out of him, and B, fighting a robot while that is controlling the chopper with his mind, who is doing both at the same time, which he points out is kind of impressive. But in case, Reagan then proceeds to confront Robotus, who points out that threatens to shoot him, but Robotus points out that she's not going to do it because he's her life's work, and points out that he knows her better than anybody else because they're both cold calculating machines in a way. He points out that obviously they get disconnected from society because they believe that everything is worthless and pointless, and does point out that obviously humanity isn't always worth saving or looking out for, but of course Reagan merely responds by pointing out that JR did get one thing right about her, and that she's complicated, and then proceeds to chop Robotus in half, and then a champagne bucket from the couple's flight winds up landing on his head and shutting him down permanently, and they're able to regain control of the chopper. And it's at this point where Reagan and Brett have a bit of a heart-to-heart, having finally dealt with the president, and Reagan finally realizes that Brett was hired because now she realizes that the two of them complement each other. Reagan is good with all of the leadership stuff and actually running all of the things, but she's not very charismatic. Whereas Brett is very charismatic but not able to run things. So she realizes now that the two of them were made partners for a reason, and decides to form a truce. But then also realize, because the couple that's currently in the plane with them, that they actually didn't disarm the nukes, and they proceed to shut them off. And of course we then find out the next day that the entire thing was dealt with. They covered up all the news media outlets to make everything uncovered up. They unkidnapped the real president, who is now being held at sniper point to actually make decisions that they want. And overall the entire thing was now covered up, and the whole AmeriCube situation has been completely vetoed. And of course JR is very happy about the fact that the president is now just incompetent and no longer murderous. And when Reagan walks in, he does thank her for all of it, pointing out that he never doubted her, even though she points out he quite literally fired her. And to celebrate, they decide to go out and get some margaritas. And of course everybody leaves Reagan behind. And Brett asks Reagan if she wants to come along, and Reagan points out that she has to check on her dad. But then, seeing the entire list of text messages he's leaving, decides against it and decides to go with Brett anyway. And of course Brett is very happy about the fact that they dismantled Robotus and took care of it. And Reagan just kind of jokingly points out that yeah, she's very happy too. But then we find out that actually she's keeping him in the basement, and that's he's tapped into the security systems, but that's pretty much the only thing he has access to. He's kept in the basement on a limited power supply. So yeah, of course. So yeah, obviously this episode, of course, sets up all the main characters, which is important going forward. But also, this episode just kind of establishes what kind of series this is, about how all the government conspiracies are true. It's a workplace comedy, and the first episode is about them trying to replace the president of the United States with a robot, just a generic robot. But in any case, yeah, it is a fun little series, and I'm looking forward to reviewing it. And I will have to shuffle things around to try and figure out when I'm going to be able to review everything. But I mean, for the time being, it'll be fine. I'll work it out. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. I'll be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does help us support me, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So just be sure to go check those out. Be sure to check out my Twitter if you want to see updates about what's going on with the channel. That's the main way to do that. Go check out my Discord as well if you want to connect with me. And finally, go and check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!